Thank you very much. We very much appreciated that, and it's a great gift and honor to learn so much from our friends in the Netherlands. Now, we are now going to switch to our final panel discussion. How do I switch the presentation? Okay. So I promise I'm going to be extremely quick and try to set up a kind of provocation for this next panel. This next panel is about how do we have both governance and financial models that can help us pay for all of this. And one of the questions that, of course, I've been asked repeatedly through this is, will we continue to have development on the waterfront? We have approximately in New York City 375,000 people who live in Zone A, in the most vulnerable zone. I don't see those people evacuating anytime soon, with maybe a few exceptions here or there. What's interesting is, as I said, we're going to launch a little study to look at what worked and what didn't in terms of new development, because some new development did quite well during this storm and other new development did not. And so we need to understand that. And as Jeannie said, some of that is not rocket science. It's really about properly designed mechanical systems and some other things, and also how to design the landscape properly. Now, at the Center for Urban Real Estate, we're very intentionally called CURE because we truly believe that cities are the key answer to many of the challenges we face, both economically and environmentally. Kate talked about carbon, and of course in cities we're naturally people who use less carbon because we use mass transit, we live close together. And what I thought was important, and Vin and I agreed that it was important to show this from about 1.5 years ago, which is some student work. And I want to stress that this is student work that was done under the guidance of myself and my colleague Lori Hawkinson by 2 design and 2 development students who were looking at this 1.5 years ago and thinking about the fact that much of the areas that we've developed, especially through the course of the last 10 years, lie squarely in Zone A, in the traditional shoreline. And of course, that shoreline has changed dramatically over time. And if you look at where we are right now, we of course would have been underwater not that long ago. That since 1650, we have continuously changed our shoreline and all the way out to the construction of Battery Park City, which of course was done with the construction debris and dirt from the Trade Center site. Another fascinating fact that probably many people don't realize is the harbor is quite shallow, and that we dredge the harbor, the Army Corps dredges the harbor continuously for larger and larger ships. In fact, we're going to have larger ships coming through the Panama Canal. And what this diagram is trying to show is if you just took that dredge material and placed it here, as opposed to shipping it to landfills, which we do right now, we ship it out to landfills, that by 2065, you'd get that much new land in the harbor, which is kind of an extraordinary thing to think about, that dirt is being taken out. So our students looked at the notion of creating something that they called LOLO, Lower Manhattan. And basically the idea of this, I said it was a provocation, right? The idea of this was, and you'll see this is done in the parlance of New York City zoning maps, right? To extend the island, Manhattan, out to Governor's Island, keep the historic district of Governor's Island, and actually create a new neighborhood. And it would have subways and would be teeming with life and activity. It would take about 640 acres of developable land. Now, we all laugh. But what's of course interesting is if you look at the international comparisons that are, sorry, I know some of you maybe can't read the bottom of that slide, but what it's saying is if this is 640 acres that our students are talking about, that there's actually some landfill going on around the world. Hong Kong Airport, Manhattan up to about 1980, Tokyo Bay, about 61,000 acres of landfill going on right now, and of course our friends in the Netherlands who are worldwide experts in this kind of land construction. Now, what was fascinating about this LOLO idea, and it did get a lot of attention at the time, but I think a lot of people didn't realize that it was triggered by the idea of how does one protect and create soft edges and actually protect Lower Manhattan. And it was an extraordinary amount of development that was being proposed. It would develop over many, many years. It would cost a lot of money, but it would generate a tremendous amount of value. And depending on what density you built it at, you could build all sorts of affordable housing, subway lines, and most importantly, you could finance many of the kinds of things that have been talked about all morning, be they artificial barrier islands, be they a new sort of front line for New York City. It would have quite a strong population and have a lot of jobs and economic development associated with it. Again, this is the comparison of the land area compared to other land reclamations being done around the world. And if you can see this slide, I think one of the most interesting aspects of what the students did is they looked at the fact that this new neighborhood could be designed to flood. That streets, parks, that the bases of buildings, so forth, that it could be a new protective front line, if you would. Now, the reason we wanted to show this today was not to propose this idea, but to provoke a couple of questions. First of all, many of the ideas that we've talked about here today are not possible under our existing regulatory regime. We're not allowed to build out into the water, unlike many countries. What was interesting is when I was with the students in Rotterdam and we brought up this issue of the fact that you can't do any kind of shoreline changes in the United States anymore, by and large, our friends from the Netherlands said, "What? That just seems extraordinary." And what's interesting is if you go to Rotterdam and you go to Amsterdam, as Justin said, much of the new development is happening right at the water's edge. And so to me that is a very interesting lesson because it is not necessarily this knee-jerk, we should pull away from the water, but maybe we should in fact learn how to live with it, and perhaps maybe we don't need to build all of Lolo, but we could consider actually building a new front line for many of our most vulnerable places that could absorb some of this water, create a new water's edge, and also help to pay for many of the things that we're going to talk about in terms of public-private partnership. So with that little provocation, I'm going to turn it back to Vin.
Okay, we are going to bring up our final panel. We have until about 12:30 when we'll be hearing from Secretary Salazar. And I'm going to skip on the really big bio introductions, but you all are so famous we don't need to do that. So, okay, Shaun, we all know, Holiday Professor of Real Estate Development and Director, Center for Urban Real Estate Cure at Columbia. Next to him, Bob Steele. Bob, if you could come on up. Bob is, of course, Deputy Mayor for Economic Development. Thank you so much for being here, Bob. We also have with us Christopher Ward, Executive Vice President of Dragados and former head of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And last and not least, Madeline Wills, President and CEO of the Hudson River Park Trust. Okay, we are getting many questions from you, so that is terrific, so thank you and keep them coming. We have folks here that will take cards from you, give you cards. Questions are also coming in from our live stream audience, and I'm loaded with questions, and they're really, really good. And they're definitely kind of going in themes, and so this is going to be a very rich discussion, and I think a little challenging maybe at times. But before I get to the questions, since Shaun had an opportunity to say a few opening remarks, I didn't want to deny anyone else the opportunity to maybe just lead off by saying a few things that might be on your minds. And actually, I thought, Madeline, I would ask you first, since you're one of the few people who's taking the stage today, who is managing a specific geography at this moment, very, very affected, dramatically affected by Hurricane Sandy. So, maybe you'd like to begin.
Thank you, Vin. I manage the Hudson River Park, which is 5 miles of coastline on the Hudson River from 59th Street down to Chambers and then zigzags right down here to the Battery. We experienced flooding of the entire park. It was quite remarkable to stand on top of Pier 40 during the hurricane and see the entire park underwater. Out of that, we saw some very interesting issues. One was that the new piers that we constructed, there are 13 new piers, they actually did quite well. Why did they do well? Because we built them in concrete. They were made to withstand flooding, and we built them to the 100-year floodplain, which obviously didn't work. But we planted them with plants and trees that did very well underwater. They're not meant to live underwater, but for the time of the hurricane, they seem to be fairly unscathed. So we'll see next spring if we lose any, but basically we lost about 5 trees and very few plants at all. So where we did not have buildings and just plant materials, we did very well. The buildings, on the other hand, because they were built to the 100-year floodplain and our mechanicals actually were built a little higher than the 100-year floodplain, but that still didn't help since obviously it went over the 500-year floodplain. So we did experience an entire electrical failure, and by the way, we still have no electricity in the park. We have our own transformers, and we don't get direct feeds from Con Ed, so we are still testing every single piece of equipment in the park. So clearly our biggest issue right now is managing how we're going to get our mechanical and electrical systems online. And in doing so, we are also looking at raising as much of the circuitry as possible, as much as we can afford right now, and as much as we have headroom to do, and within the building code as it exists right now, and certainly that has to be looked at as well. Where we really suffer, we suffer pre-Sandy, we suffer post-Sandy, is in the older structures. Obviously, Pier 40 did not, it's still standing. The piles probably did not have much more deterioration than they currently have, but our boilers flooded. We had lots of remediation from oil spills. Our substation went underwater. We have 2 our entire electrical system that not only powers Pier 40, but south of it was filled with water. Hopefully we're going to get the Pier 40 situation on the electrical handled in the next few weeks. We're finally seeing a little bit of light of day of that. And we will be raising the circuitry of that as much as we have room to do that without having to build new structures there currently. Some of the issues that I think are very interesting for us that we even knew pre-Sandy, I mean, just in studying the waterfront and being very involved, for me particularly at EDC, since, as I said, 100% of all my development projects at EDC are or were in Zone A. So we did a lot of work on the waterfront and learned a lot. But Hudson River Park is very interesting because we in the entire west side, we have what's considered an historic bulkhead. So the bulkhead has been rebuilt at the same height and the same size and with similar materials, which are all hard materials, not soft materials, not porous materials. And knowing that probably this was not the best way to rebuild the bulkhead, but having to live by some of the regulatory agencies, SHPO, State Historic Preservation, who mandated that we rebuild the bulkhead to the same size as the historic 19th century bulkhead. So we have rebuilt most of that bulkhead now. We're continuing to rebuild that bulkhead. We should be rebuilding it higher. We should, where we can, rebuild it softer with riprap in areas that we could do that, but we're not allowed to do that. So we do what we're allowed to do. As Shaun was saying earlier, an interesting, when I was at EDC, one of the issues that I dealt with was helping Brooklyn Bridge Park get their original DEC permit. And originally we had breakwaters across the piers that would have acted as paths to connect the piers, but also breakwaters so that you would soften the blow of any floodwaters coming in. Because they shadowed the fish, we had to remove them entirely. And even when we try to keep some breakwaters below the surface, and getting rid of the paths. We're not allowed to do that. We could not get our permit for Brooklyn Bridge Park if we kept those breakwaters. So clearly those breakwaters would be helpful. So that just gives you a little bit of a start of how we have to really start to align the city, the state, and the federal government. And even interestingly enough, Department of State doesn't necessarily interpret all the regulations the same as the Department of Environmental Conservation. I don't want to pick on DC because in the last couple of years, DC is rethinking a lot of this. But we have to do better about aligning all of our interests.
Thank you, Madeline. Bob, you're obviously having to take a citywide perspective. Shaun, Donovan mentioned earlier we need to be smart rather than rebuilding what was already there. Could you make a few sort of remarks about what you're seeing right now?
Sure. Ben, first of all, thanks to MAS for convening a group like this and so quickly getting us collecting perspective, because that's valuable, so thanks to you. I guess I'd make just a couple of points, and then we can get to the questions. I think that I'd make 3 points. The first of all is our life has gone through a series of stages. The first really being to prepare for the storm as we knew it was anticipating. Then we went into rescue type operations, and now we're moving into recovery, whether it's with regard to home ownership, small businesses, and trying to get people back in their homes. And so those were the things that have taken the last 30 days. I think now we're on to, and the mayor announced this last week in his speech, we're on to what we've learned and where we're going. And Mayor Bloomberg announced that we would be doing an after event type analysis of what went right, what went wrong, what we could do better. And so that's going to be led by my fellow deputy mayors, Linda Gibbs and Cass Holloway, and we'll report back to the public in a public report by the end of February what we've learned about what we could do better in response. I think the second thing that Mayor Bloomberg talked about is really connects directly with what Secretary Donovan was discussing. And that is Mayor Bloomberg announced that he had asked President Seth Pinsky of EDC to take responsibility for a longer-term perspective. I think that Seth's perspective, or his brief or mandate, has really 2 parts, and they're quite related. The first part is what are the long-term resiliency plans for the city? And the good news here is, all of you know, because you're informed, is that we have Plan YC, which is our base, which has helped us frame a lot of these issues and has a lens looking in the right place. But we're going to certainly refresh and relook further down the road. And the second issue or responsibility for Seth is to report back on, as all of us know, there are a handful, depending on how you define them, 5, 6, 7 different locations that were dramatically affected. And Seth will report back on what we think the ambition should be, and in some cases it should be to return to the pre-storm state, certainly with enhancements and changes, but others it might be to be licensed to think more dramatically, as Shaun suggested we do earlier. And so I think that's the second part of Seth's work. And I guess in conclusion, I would offer just 2 principles that Mayor Bloomberg has said, and I'm pleased to repeat. And that is, number 1 is the water is an important part of the success and of what we are in New York City. 520 miles, I think, Shaun, of shoreline. And so we're going to have to accept that and not retreat from it, but instead to figure out the right way to engage with it. But I think the second point on this, really in terms of principles, so number 1, the waterfront is part of what we are, and we're not going to retreat. But the second is that we're going to take a long-term perspective in thinking about how to do that in an efficient, effective, and smart way. And that's why taking into account the things we've heard from other speakers and getting that into the mix, and President Pinsky, President of EDC, will come back with his group in the spring to tell us about what he's learned and to deliver a document that will frame all of this for us.
Thank you, Bob. Chris, thinking about these issues and planning for them is not new for you. So, any opening remarks?
Sure. This may surprise you, but I really have little or nothing to say. So I can, in fact, be brief. So just, you've heard an incredible amount of information today, so let me sort of recap some of what I took from it. I think Jeannie was absolutely right. This is a question of government and government response, and do we have the mechanisms to really bring together all that we have? And I think the blunt answer to that is no, we don't. I would be nervous, regardless of my good friend Bob Steele, of thinking that it can solely reside within New York City government. We've seen the challenges between New York State and New York City. Compounding that, we must take into account New Jersey and New Jersey's role. I'm not arguing that it should then obviously be the Port Authority, but I think we do need to face the political challenge of where this response comes from. Second, I think the Secretary and the cost-benefit ratio, the $4 to $1 return, I think is the bedrock of a cost-benefit analysis, that if we are going to synthesize the hard with the soft, until we can come up with a cost-benefit ratio that is not simply hard dollars versus return, but as a couple of the other speakers spoke about, that cost-benefit ratio to value what we in fact do must take into a broader social, political consequences of what those decisions are. And then last, as for those of you who saw Al Gore before the mayor spoke, his call to action, if there's anything that I've spoken about, is the fact that we do not have adequate funding for what we knew we had to do before Sandy. We are now layering in another whole level of enormous amounts of expenditures and building on the cost-benefit ratio for the projects that we want to do to improve the city for post-Sandy. We can't leave behind that which we knew we had to do before, and then synthesizing new designs and new strategies for those projects that were pre-Sandy in now. The post-Sandy world, I think, is a fundamental political challenge, because it will allow you to go back to the electorate and talk to them about this is your city in a different way that infrastructure was not able to really capture. And the idea is somewhat of a fellow traveler argument that we can start to build the things, whether it's the MTA, whether it's the Port Authority, whether it's the city infrastructure, with a new paradigm under the climate change, I think is the opportunity here.
I want to mingle the panels a little bit here, and the questions that are coming in, there's a lot of interest in a subject which the previous panelists each raised, Kate raised very specifically, and we would need a whole other day or 2 or 4 to really properly investigate it, and that has to do with really a sustainable economy, an economic environment and model that really is dealing with climate change head on. Kate mentioned carbon, and that are connected to the fact that our oceans can't handle anymore. The pollute, when you pollute, dilute kind of scenario of the past is completely intolerable, although it is happening in many, many parts of the world. We have rising acidification in our oceans, which is really killing off the bottom of the food chain. We obviously have rising temperatures and rising sea levels, and Sandy wasn't even a hurricane. So with all of that, is there a serious conversation in your views going on about those questions and resulting strategies that New York and places like New York need to consider in order to welcome a new, let's call it, the climate change economy?
Having said I don't have anything to say now, let me talk about that length. I think the answer, unfortunately, to that is no. We haven't really done it. There's been an incredible amount of academic work. There's been an incredible amount of public policy and planning work, but I don't think it's really robust within what we know we need to do, and it hasn't been there nearly enough. I think for me and my perspective on the city, and I said this at the MAS conference a while ago, that if you look at where we would experiment to find out can we build a sustainable city, it runs from Brooklyn Park all the way down to 65th and the Brooklyn Waterfront, where you do have, under that classic Dutch model, a deindustrialized waterfront in Amsterdam, and then it moved to Rotterdam. And what are then going to be the strategies of that now current hard infrastructure as it transforms to create jobs, provide public access to Sunset Park, which has the least amount of public parks of any part of the city, and create a waterfront which is sustainable, that brings people down to it. And I think if the next administration has the opportunity, I think the leadership for reimagining Brooklyn is the real incubator for what the city might do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have a lot to add to this. As Chris just reminded, you know, some of these things are going to be dealt with in 378 days when we leave, and not that I'm counting. The reality is that we're organized in our government so that consensus has to develop over time, and that's the way we're organized. And so it's frustrating to those of us that think we see the future more clearly, that the consensus has to build around us. But I believe that you have these important events that add more speed to this process, and I believe this instance is one that will serve that effect. And we in New York, and as Chris said, it's the region, have a chance to take this on board. And I worry a bit that too many people's lives have gone back to normal post the storm. And I'm afraid I spend my life, or a lot of it, trying to make sure people don't realize that several 100,000 of our citizens are really still imperiled, and lots of businesses are struggling and things like this, because it's pretty easy in certain parts of our city to kind of get back to life. So hopefully we'll use this as an event to accelerate and to raise the issue, and that we'll develop in civil society more discussion about this, and to push us and get the flywheel turning more quickly. But I think the idea that we're going to look at our watch and there's going to be a decision or an aha moment doesn't work like that. And that's on purpose. And that consensus has to develop around ideas, and I think it's building, but it's not going to be instantaneous. And I do think the mayor, and you know, that if you look at Plan YC and the work that Shaun and others have done, you know, we're doing our best. The speech last week, the things he talks about, we think it's our responsibility, administration, to be a drumbeat, and maybe we should be louder, or maybe we should be doing it differently, but that's what our strategy is.
Madeline, you wanted to?
I just wanted to add that the city, as we all know, has this enormous waterfront, the largest in the country. The state itself, when you look at the state, well over 80% of the people in the state live in the coastal areas. And that's less than 15% of the entire property of the state. So frankly, I still get the question is, you know, should we still be living on the waterfront? Well, unless we're going to turn the state upside down, we are going to have to deal with this. But then again, in a larger effort, and an effort that I think that we all need, is that we are dealing in a country that most of the area is not on the coastal zone. And to be able to have this conversation nationwide in a meaningful way, in a way that it does speak about infrastructure, which it hasn't before this hurricane and may not after. I think until we can get climate change and a conversation within this country that's meaningful, it's going to very much inhibit what we can do as coastal areas.
You know, I would just quickly, my family and I were in the Adirondacks during Hurricane Irene, and we watched a supermarket go down like it had been in a magnitude 8 earthquake. And so this notion that we can run from this somehow, that there's something that's fundamentally different about the coast versus the inland, I think is a fallacy. And you asked in whether there was a serious conversation going on. I think it's a split answer. I think there's virtually no serious conversation going on the national level. The last thing that the UN was able to do was Agenda 21, which Glenn Beck has turned into some weird Margaret Atwood-like novel. And so, you know, it's really at a national level not a very serious discussion. But at the city level and the leadership of the mayor and the administration in C40, I think the cities are going to lead our way, hopefully, out of this. But there, I think, very serious conversations going on, whether it's Hong Kong or if you look at my home country in India, all the fleet vehicles are now compressed natural gas and they're zero emission. What Chicago has done, I mean, when Jeannie was talking about pavement and so forth, I mean, Chicago has really rethought the way they should be building public space. I think that's where the action is. And so I'm hoping, actually, that at the federal level, we can catch up to what the cities have been doing.
I think many of us would agree that this is a cities-led domain. You can see that I'm toggling so many questions. I mean, this is quite a pile. So thank you for your enthusiasm and today and what we're talking about. So I'm going to go between a few different things, and since you all did touch upon governance, let's go there. This question actually came up in the previous panel when Jeannie was raising a point about both coordination and leadership. So the question is, rather than calling for a consolidated information system and leader, who do you propose should lead such a coordinated system? A new agency, federal, state, or city?
Bob.
Just say Bob.
So,
Bob?
I didn't hear the prescription. I was meeting with Secretary Donovan, so give me another sentence or two of what was the framework.
That there are a lot of tools in the toolbox that it isn't that can be applied, that it's not rocket science, but it is about leadership and vision. It's about coordination and accountability. And when you have something that's multi-jurisdictional, lots of players, lots of money, a grab for money, and maybe from some places, kind of a little bit of a build, baby, build mentality. Let's put it back, make believe it never happened. Where does the coordinated leadership come from? Where is the ultimate accountability?
Okay, so let's unpack that together. Thank you. The reality is that, again, I believe we have to accept certain things as the way they are. And we have different jurisdictional responsibilities, both within the public sector and in the private sector. So there are people that provide our power that are not part of government. They're regulated in some cases they're franchisees. And so I guess the way I would think about it, Ben, is that we now actually, I view the situation we have today as a fortuitous one from the perspective that we have Secretary Donovan, who's been appointed by the President to be a bit of the maestro for what we're going to do. And I think the good news for why I'm optimistic is that in addition to the bully pulpit, he has something that's more important for behavior change, and that is money. And that basically he's going to be a person who can help organize how the money gets spent. And for those people who work collaboratively to the bully pulpit, he has something that's more important for behavior change, and that is money. And that basically he's going to be a person who can help organize how the money gets spent. And for those people who work collaboratively, there'll be reward. For those people that don't, there will be not reward. And so I view that as a good situation. There are certain things that we in New York City should be responsible for, and we shouldn't wait for a collective perspective to develop. We should get at it. There are other things, as Madeline highlighted, where we need to be working with our state government, and as Chris knows better than anyone, there are issues that really are of a much broader regional perspective. And so the reality is there are going to be these separate lenses on issues, local, state, and then region. And I think the good news is we have a maestro, that's Secretary Donovan, and so I'm optimistic actually that this will be a good exercise in the fact that he knows our city well, and the fact that I think he's very skilled at working with people and is committed and wants to make this work, and that the president, his president has, our all president has 3 years ahead of him. It's a good enough time, so I'd be optimistic that that's the right answer, but it's not going to be a person in charge. It's going to have to be organizing all the different groups so they play together in the right way. And there's some things that we're in charge, some things the state's in charge, and some things no one's really in charge, so that's where he can fill in that position.
Maybe
Is that
just,
responsive? Or?
yeah, maybe 2 follow-up points. And Secretary Donovan is no longer in the House, right? He's left. And Secretary Salazar has not yet arrived. But it is live streamed, this event. Okay, so, I mean, the feds have I've worked in Washington twice, I know how this works. So, the feds have gotten very high marks here in New York, generally speaking, for their responsiveness, for the coordination of that responsiveness. Probably our friends in New Jersey, and there may be some New Jersey people here feel the same way. So I'm assuming no one's nodding in the reverse direction. And with Secretary Donovan at the helm, there's a sense that the response will be coordinated in an effective way and in a consistent way.
Both within his colleagues in Washington and also with those of us in the region, because he faces 2 ways to coordinate.
Absolutely.
So I think that's an important comment to make too.
Yeah, and the sell-through in Washington is probably more daunting than working with all of us here. Is hard to imagine as that might be. But what about, as Madeline had pointed out, about her previous role in the Department of Economic Development? What about our economic development strategy here in New York in light of the events that have just taken place? Madeline made the comment about everything that she worked on was in Zone A. Are you proud of the results of your work in Zone A? You made a comment about that.
For the most
much
part,
of it,
yes. Yes, for the most part. I mean, we built parks all over the coastline, and for the most part, parks are something that should be on the coastline, so that's a good thing. I think there always can be a better way to think about, and because money is always an issue for all of these projects, always a better way to think about more surfaces that can be created that will take on water more easily, more green roofs, more creating more wetlands, and all of that. But that costs money. So generally, when we think about these projects, we come up with wonderful plans that we want to build, and then we start value engineering them back and end up building what we can find the money to build, with always the notion that we could have done better. So yes, we can do better. But I think, look, New York City is so far ahead because of this mayor, is so far ahead in so many levels in terms of looking to the waterfront and looking at that as a place to go to and not run from. So I think that the first steps are there, and the knowledge base is also there. And what we're grappling with is how to get the money for the infrastructure needs, and how do you manage a private-public investment on the kinds of infrastructure that is needed, so that we can actually implement what we already know we ought to be doing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the forecast for, and there was some discussion on the break about this, but what we can anticipate here in New York, if we're hit in a similar path to how Sandy came in, with a true category, say 2 or 3, is kind of overwhelming, I guess, to think about. And those in the room that are thinking more about that specifically, again, during the break, have raised, how are we really real about this? We've heard the statement about the integration of infrastructure and natural resources. And look, I think that as New Yorkers, we feel that our consciousness on this is very high. I feel that way. I mean, I think that this city is the best in how it's thinking about its built environment, moving things forward. That doesn't mean that there aren't terrific things that we can learn from other places and that there isn't innovation that we can emulate, but that we do have leadership here that gets it, is concerned, and has been taking steps. So I guess maybe a little bit in real time, do we anticipate some specific changes to the program that we've become accustomed to with regard to how we're building out the water's edge?
So I'm not going to ask Seth Penske to take a job and then give the answer before he does his work. But I think that the answer to that has to be yes. I said two principles that I thought about before I spoke, when I spoke. And that is, number one, is that we're not going to retreat from having the water be part of how we live and as part of our lives, both in terms of housing, in terms of recreation, in terms of commerce, and in terms of transportation. That's not a retreatable plan. It's not a plan to retreat. Number two, I said that we will look hard, we will evaluate and understand how to have a fully developed longer-term vision as how to deal with these expected challenges, and we will be forward-looking and not to just think about the steady state of climate change effect, but also the acute and the most challenging periods effects of climate change. And it's really a resiliency issue, not just about water. It's also about lack of water in some occasions. It's about winds. It's about other things. You know, this hurricane caused damage for one of the three possible reasons. You know, it's wind, rain, and surge. This was all about surge. It was not wind and it was not rain. With the one exception of the wind that we all saw on 57th Street, that was really not the issue. It was surge. So we're going to think about all of these things. And that's all I can report back to you. And I'm optimistic that when we come back to you in the spring, that you'll get a developed perspective that will be forward-looking and detailed that we will be sharing. And also in the process of developing this, there will be significant outreach and communication. It's not going to be us just talking to ourselves.
Because you've asked a bunch of questions that I just like to sort of bring together. I mean, the first one was about governance. I think Bob is right. And clearly the mayor has been the regional leader and the secretary in his remarks, and will be with the Obama administration for 3 years. Unfortunately, this is a 10, 15, 100-year issue, and the feds will not always be there for the money that we need. So I do think that there's going to be the need for some type of replicating the Dutch water board within this region, largely because you're basically allocating scarce resources on a set of priorities that need to be communicated within the region. And until there's an ability to go between the city and the state and talk about scarce resources and say that here's the cost-benefit ratio with the social included in that, it can't just be hard dollars of remediation. This region is going to sort of tear itself apart in making those sorts of decisions. And I come back again and again that what we weren't doing pre-Sandy is an agenda that is as scary as you can possibly find. To now have a post-Sandy environment with that cost is stressing the MTA, is stressing the Port Authority, and the optimism is to take, as Bob said, this challenge and reprogram how we're thinking about all those infrastructure questions, and use this opportunity to make that investment more robust and stronger, and reprogram how we're thinking about all those infrastructure questions, and use this opportunity to make that investment more robust and stronger, and candidly find ways to fund it locally, because I don't think the feds, as Shaun said, have exactly been rising to this challenge, both intellectually but also then financially.
You know, many of these questions, these cards are, please address combined sewer and overflow. Please address the location of public housing. How do we prioritize this extraordinary set of needs? I mean, that over and over the questions are, and there are people that are hurting, as we know. This just happened. I mean, this is very fresh. It was, it was a bold action to get everybody together today.
Thank you.
And we're so grateful for that. But what is your sense of that? I mean, the questions that are coming in from folks online in the room are about these kinds of concerns, which absolutely come back to infrastructure, aging infrastructure choices, new considerations that need to be made. How do these things get prioritized? Are we just going to put it back? And we don't, it would be impossible to be able to answer all those things today, but these are the kinds of things, as we can all appreciate, that are on so many people's minds.
So let me take a swing at defining the issue and the process for addressing these issues, because I don't think you can answer them, but let me tell you. So there are a couple of characteristics about this area. Number one is that if you look at the places that were most affected by the water, it was 2.5 to 3 times the weight that we normally have in New York City of public housing. So normally public housing is about 4.5% of the population live in public housing. In the affected area, it was 12, 13%, maybe a little higher. So there's no question that a thread, and we can all read our favorite book as to why this was the case, but it is the case. And so we'll have to think about what that means and what the implications are. The second characteristic of this area is that there were 7 or 8 business districts, most of which were small businesses, and 1 business district which is a large business district where we're sitting today. And so on the small businesses, it's really more of a hand-to-hand combat, a bit like homes as opposed to large business. So the small businesses that are in Red Hook or the Rockaways or Coney, we've got to figure out the best public policy to help them get back on their feet. And that's not just because of the net worth of the businesses themselves, it's because of what they mean to the community. If you have a community that's lost their food, the food stores, then that's not good. It also is where most of these people work. So it's about jobs and rebuilding the community, and it's not just businesses. In many cases, it's the community organizations and things like that. So we have a public policy ambition of how we get them rebooted and back on their feet. And we're working on that. We've pushed out loans, but we have to keep aggressive on that. The more challenging business situation is, as I said, where we're sitting, and if my memory is correct, they're about, and Shaun can correct me because he knows all this, but I think that there are about 300 square feet of commercial real estate in Manhattan, and where we're sitting in Lower Manhattan is about 70 million. So we took a big whack of the commercial real estate in New York was affected by this. And so we'll have to have a plan to make sure we can create the confidence that Lower Manhattan is an important business center that can work. And so that's got to be part of the priorities too. And the way then to answer the question is that's what the next few months are about. And we will come back to you, I promise, to do our very best to putting in priorities, costs, and making a recommendation. You know, this comes, I enjoy government and public policy, and there are different roles for the different branches. This is a responsibility of the executive branch of the federal government on the execution and planning. It's a responsibility of the executive branch of the state governments, and it's a responsibility of the executive branch of the city. And we'll certainly have help and be assisted and work closely with, but it's up to us to be leaders. And it's not going to be a consensus, it's going to take leadership, and I'm raising my hand and telling you that my boss has told us to be leaderly and think about these issues and come back to you.
Please, just quickly on this, just to reinforce what Bob is saying, what I find extraordinary about some of the aftermath of the storm is the unevenness, the unevenness of the impacts. In the sense that, the day after the storm, the chairman of Goldman Sachs was on TV saying 200 West Street was fine, they suffered very little water damage, brand new building, and yet we see Water Street and a whole other side of downtown in really very difficult and challenging circumstances. With public housing, by and large, right, medium to high density housing did pretty well in the city, except for the public housing stock. I think would you say that's a fair statement, Bob?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I know there's a lot of gray in there, but it is interesting to me, and again, I don't want to jump to conclusions as to why that's true, but it does tell you that these are solvable problems. And as people are asking those questions, it does say that there are answers out there for how one can build in this environment and be resilient.
I want to remind everyone that Battery Park City is on infill, and that it actually is a couple of feet higher than the Hudson River Park. I noticed that right after I took my job when they had the first storm, Irene, and went out on the water to look at the bulkheads and realized how much higher Battery Park City was sitting than the rest of the west side. So these things obviously have been thought of before. They need to be thought of more, but it's a man-made area, and there was some thought put into that.
Actually, Madeline, since you have the mic, well, before I go to a specific Hudson River Park question, because there is one, and again, a lot of what's reflected on these cards are the subjects that I've raised, and also an awful lot around environmental justice concerns, and I think perhaps we certainly should come back to some of those. But a question on Hudson River Park specifically, it says on this card that the plan for Hudson River Park says that the park is designed for the 500-year floodplain. Others have said that it could withstand a 100-year flood. What does NOAA and FEMA say? Can we really afford to wait to get the answer to that? And why are we even talking about 100-year floods anymore?
Well, I won't be talking about 100-year floods anymore. Clearly, everything that we're thinking about as we're thinking about rebuilding is lifting everything that we can, and where we can't is making sure that we have the kinds of areas that can withstand these types of floods. And, you know, parkland looks better to me now. I mean, thinking about any of the new piers that we do, parkland, moving the buildings up and back, any new buildings that get constructed. This seems sensible at this point. I mean, we had a couple of plans to put more buildings on the, you know, out in the river. Maybe we don't put them quite as far out, and maybe they get a lot higher, and we have to rethink about, you know, any of the ground floor commercial on our commercial piers and what we do about that. But just in terms of parkland itself, I think it did pretty well, and I think more of it is a good idea.
What kind of resiliency investment strategies can be leveraged to address environmental justice concerns regarding the clusters of heavy industrial uses along vulnerable waterfront areas?
So I get the tough one. Well, first of all, I'm actually not that clear on the question because I'm not really sure outside of the Gowanus Canal, I'm not from Newtown Creek, where you really do have heavy industrial activity in New York City. I think you have a lot of post-industrial sites around the Gowanus and around Newtown Creek, and I think without a doubt, what I was trying to get to when I was talking about the Brooklyn waterfront, which is, you know, directly related to the ecology of the Gowanus, is that the planning, the rejuvenation of that in post-Sandy has to recognize that, you know, directly related to the ecology of the Gowanus, is that the planning, the rejuvenation of that in post-Sandy has to recognize that there are people who are deeply committed throughout the city on a variety of levels of what the water means to them and how they end up interacting with it. So while and Bob is talking, and if he's correct about the executive branch, I don't think we really can ignore that there's a huge amount of passion, intelligence, and thoughtfulness, and again, coming back to environmental justice communities that are desperately want to be part of this new post-Sandy environment. And I think that is a part of a catalyst that I was trying to get to before about energizing the executive branch to be bold, to find funding, to cut through red tape, to end up making kind of critical decisions. And so it's going to be marrying that executive branch with an organization like the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance, which has 700, you know, members. And I think that is part of the political challenge. And if you add environmental justice into that, it only then reinforces the community aspect of how much post-Sandy's going to have to do.
The great thing about something like NWA is they bring together the various perspectives, whether it's housing, whether it's recreation, whether it's the commercial activities, all the different things that are happening on the water, and we've got to think collaboratively. And you know, the reality is that with this many interests, you know, we're going to have people compromise, and none of us. The right solution will have. Hopefully, people will be similarly or equally disappointed, because that's what we need to forge, is a consensus that we can all live with, but be respectful of all those different interests that have a claim on what's going on.
Can I actually disagree with you on that one?
Good.
I think we have to, not to piss you off, but we need to be a little careful of this paradigm that says as long as everybody's equally disappointed or is equally pleased, there's a certain sort of, I was going to say crass utilitarianism in that, but I think going back to the environmental justice question and so much of what the Dutch are dealing with, that you do have to ask yourself, like the public housing question, where are those who are least able to deal with it are best handled? And if we begin to think about, the sort of measure of how we treat those who are least well off when we make investment decisions as a way to build a sustainable and just city, I think has got to be part of that equation.
Point taken.
No one's talking about future stakeholders here. It's all present pie. What about the future?
Well, I think hopefully the question is about the future. Hopefully,
future generations who are not voting yet, who are bearing the cost of carbon. No one's talking about that.
so I think that's what stewardship's about. And if we,
You're ignoring the issue. No one's talking about it. Talk about it.
okay,
Jump right in here, Bob.
so if we, I actually don't accept the premise, to be honest. I think that's wrong and then more wrong. The idea of Plan YC was basically a forward-looking perspective. If you look at the mayor's leadership in C40, I think that's a forward-looking perspective. And I think that everything we talk about is stewards for the future. And so I don't accept the premise that, that people aren't thinking that way. And so I don't have anything else to say, and to be polite.
No talking of carbon tax here. Not a word.
I think, if I may, I think somebody raised an issue. One of the challenges for Sandy and what this city is going to do and what this region is going to do is to be able to understand we're also not talking about the Middle East. We're also not talking about the two wars that this country is fighting at enormous financial cost. So that for today to be a pragmatic and then forward-thinking discussion, you do have to limit how far you can go. But everybody here totally gets it, unless you're also thinking long-term about carbon emissions and global warming. You're ignoring a huge issue, but we're also ignoring the fact that this country is spending $4 billion to fight two wars, and $2 billion of that will do an enormous amount of change to post-Sandy equation.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I am going to wrap it up because Secretary Salazar is here, and we do want to conclude the whole conference on time. I want to thank this terrific panel. Thank you so much, you guys. You're all extraordinarily busy. We really appreciate it. Would not really be able to fully get to, such as the carbon issue, which I did raise at the beginning of the session. Shaun and I have already talked about the fact that there's going to have to be a redux of sink or swim because there was way too much content for just a morning. We all appreciate that. But thanks again to this panel. Thank you all for being here. And now, I'm going to go to the podium and make an introduction. Thank you. Thank you again. It's my great honor to introduce the Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar. I've had the extraordinary privilege and opportunity to serve Secretary Salazar at the National Park Foundation. The Secretary was confirmed as the 50th Secretary of the U.S. Department of the Interior on January 20th, 2009, in a unanimous vote by the U.S. Senate. As Secretary of the Interior, Secretary Salazar is in charge of the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, the United States Geological Survey, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and other federal agencies overseen by the Interior Department, and he so graciously made the time to be here with us today. Prior to his confirmation, the Secretary served as Colorado's 35th U.S. Senator, winning election in November 2004, and serving on the Finance, Agriculture, Energy and Natural Resources, Ethics, Veterans Affairs, and Aging Committees. As a U.S. Senator, Secretary Salazar was a leader in creating and implementing a vision for a renewable energy economy that is less dependent on foreign oil. Secretary Salazar also tackled the challenge of providing affordable health care by fighting to broaden the Children's Health Insurance Program and by working to improve health care for older Americans. From 1999 through 2004, the Secretary served as Colorado's 36th Attorney General, leading efforts to make communities safer, fight crime, address youth and family violence, enhance and enforce Colorado's consumer protection laws, combat fraud against the elderly, and protect Colorado's environment. From 1987 to 1994, the Secretary served in the cabinet of Governor Roy Romer as Chief Legal Counsel and Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, where he crafted reforms for oil, mining, and gas operations to better protect the environment and public, and authored the Colorado Constitutional Amendment creating Great Outdoors Colorado. Secretary Salazar served as the first chairman of that movement, helping make it one of the most successful land conservation efforts in the United States. As the president of the League of Conservation said about then Senator Salazar about his cabinet nomination, throughout his career, Senator Salazar campaigned on a pledge of support for our land, our water, our people, and he has lived up to that pledge. And how? Please join me in welcoming our closing speaker, Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar.
Vin tells me that you all have been sitting since 9 o'clock. Are you tired? No. Are you ready to go home? Stand up for 1 minute. Stand up. Get on your feet. Let the blood stand up. Come on, why don't you stand up? All right, stand up. Shake around a little bit. Come on, we got a lot of work to do in New York and New Jersey. So has it been a good session so far? All right. Let me ask you to give Vince Cipolla a round of applause because he has been a champion for conservation for such a long time. Now, I still remember coming in my early days as Secretary of the Interior and having conversations with him about the National Parks Foundation and what it is that we could do, that we could complete a Flight 93 memorial at Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and that we could do so much more all around this country. And his passion for conservation is something that I will always admire and I will always appreciate. I also want to thank all of the participants who have been here today, including the representatives from Mayor Bloomberg's office, with whom we've had a wonderful partnership as we work here in New York, and also to my colleague and good friend Shaun Donovan, who I know you heard from earlier this morning, and who has the awesome task, awesome responsibility, and really a great privilege to work with all of you at the local and state level, as well as all the NGO community, to come to make sure that New York and New Jersey and the other areas affected are places that are able to come back in the post-Hurricane Sandy timeframe in a way that will make them even more resilient and more vibrant communities. And of this, President Obama is absolutely sure, and we on his team are absolutely sure, that we will rebuild and that we will be back. Now, for me, this morning I had the great honor of touring part of the places that I consider to be some of the most iconic places in the United States of America, including the Statue of Liberty and Liberty Island, and going into some of the buildings and assessing the damage that has occurred in both places, as well as taking an overflight that took us up to Fire Island and to Fort Tilden to see what some of the effects have been from Hurricane Sandy, and trying to work with my team so we make sure that as we rebuild, we're going to be rebuilding for a future that will even be stronger than what we had before. And I am so honored that a person who has worked with the National Park Service, who the President and I appointed to serve as a Director of the National Park Service, is John Jarvis, and he is here with me. Where is John? He's somewhere in the audience. See the guy in the uniform back there, the green uniform? Let me just say a word about John. I still don't know whether he's a Republican or a Democrat. All I know is that he started his career at the National Park Service guarding the Jefferson Memorial when he was about 23 years old. And he now is the director of the National Park Service with the 23,000 employees that we have, which adds so much to the heritage and the natural conservation for America as its principal mission, and also the custodian of our heritage of the United States of America. And I'm very proud that he is with me here today, and the fact that he has agreed to sign on for 4 more years. So thank you, John Jarvis, for being here. Let me first say to all of you that for me as Secretary of Interior, I am honored to have this position because I get to see the United States of America from sea to shining sea and out into the oceans. My work goes from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico, from Yosemite to the Statue of Liberty, from the Everglades to Glacier National Park. And wherever I go, I am always reminded about the wonders of our nation and our democracy, and how fortunate we are in this country to be able to celebrate the great joys and the democracy we have here in the United States. About 3 or 4 days after I was sworn in as Secretary of Interior in January of '09, I came here to New York, and I went to the Statue of Liberty because I wanted to make a statement to the world, and I wanted to make a statement here in New York, that the Department of Interior really was the Department of America. And we're working very hard from sea to shining sea and out into the oceans to be relevant to all of the people of America. And sometimes when people look at the Department of Interior, they view it as a department that deals mostly with Western issues. Well, the reality of it is we have more national parks and wildlife refuges in places like Florida and New York and North Dakota than we do in places like Nevada, even though Nevada is very important and we control close to 80% of the land in the state of Nevada. But the fact is that the footprint of our department and our 72,000 employees is one that covers everything that our nation touches on. Now, I came here to the Statue of Liberty because it had been closed since 9/11. The Crown had been closed since 9/11. There were major safety, fire, and health issues related to opening up the Crown at the time. And so we embarked on a program under the leadership of Director Jarvis and then the Superintendent Dave Lusinger to try to make sure that we opened up the Crown so that it would be available for access to the people of America who would want to go up and visit the statue and to visit the Crown. And over the years, we have made major renovations, and I'm proud to say that even as Hurricane Sandy brought so much pain and loss of life and devastation to New York and to New Jersey and the coastline, that the statue stood strong. And the statue itself, the monument, is as good as it was before Hurricane Sandy hit it. And that's not to say that the island itself does not have major issues. We have to deal with infrastructure issues because the electricity and a whole host of other things that we need in the island have been devastated. The same thing is true with respect to Ellis Island, even though the museum and the baggage area are all still intact. There's very significant damage that has occurred there as well. So our response at the Department of Interior has been to do everything that we can, working with local communities, working with the states, working with our partners in the federal government, to deliver on what President Obama asked us to do, and that is to make sure that we are doing our part in partnership with all of you to address the issues that have arisen because of Hurricane Sandy. For us, what that has meant is we have had about 1,500 employees who have come from 47 states around the country and who have spent time here over the last month plus working on making sure that we're doing the appropriate recovery and response and assessment of damages along the coast. It also means that for us, the National Park Service areas, including Floyd Bennett Field and Fort Tilden and other places, have been used essentially as the staging ground for much of the recovery and response efforts that have been underway since Hurricane Sandy hit this area. Now, for us, we have already done our initial assessments of the damages from Hurricane Sandy across the Atlantic coast. We have about 70 national parks, so it's more than just New York and New Jersey. We have about 25 national wildlife refuges that were affected by Hurricane Sandy as well. And some of the damages that we have been able to document at this point in time, which are now being considered by the U.S. Congress and the formal proposal that was sent over by the Office of Management and Budget, include a $429 million request just for recovery and response. That amount would essentially get us up to baseline. It would get us up to the place where we can, in fact, open these national parks and these wildlife refuges and provide the kind of service that they were providing before Hurricane Sandy hit. Now, just to give you a sense of what that means, it's about $348 million for the National Park Service, $78 million for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and $3 million for the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. They have an oil spill testing facility in New Jersey, which also was very badly damaged because of Hurricane Sandy. A little closer to home here in New York and New Jersey, the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island, estimate is it'll take about $59 million to be able to bring that up to repair. Gateway National Recreation Area, which I've worked with many of you on for a long time, our assessment right now is there are about $180 million of damage at Gateway National Recreation Area. And Fire Island, which has a breach in it and also significant damage along the walkways and other areas, we estimate about $17 million are needed for Fire Island. And so as this moves forward, we don't know yet what Congress will do. The proposal has been submitted to the President. But our hope is that we are able to open up these places as soon as we possibly can. The most asked question to me is, when will the Statue of Liberty open up again? When will we start allowing people to come back to the island? And frankly, today we can't give you that answer because we don't know yet. I can tell you all that we will do it as absolutely soon as we can, and that we will be guided by a simple proposition, and that is, when is it safe for the public and for visitors to come out to Liberty Island. Now, I want to say that for me, I look at this disaster in a way that I know all of you do, and that is that it caused a tremendous amount of pain and a tremendous amount of devastation. I was in communication with a lot of our people who were here, many people who had lost their homes, people like Dave Lussinger, who lost everything that he had in his home and who was out the next day trying to clean up things at Liberty Island. And so I know there's been a tremendous amount of pain that has come from this devastation. But I also think, out of the tragedy, that there is hope that there are great things that will come, and that we'll be able to realize some significant improvements in how we rebuild this area. And we're fortunate that President Obama and Mayor Bloomberg and Governor Cuomo and Governor Christie and so many other people have joined forces to make sure that we make this a national priority. With Shaun Donovan as the head of the task force which the President has appointed, the President has directed Shaun to basically organize the whole of the United States government to work with all of you so that we end up having a comprehensive plan on how we move forward with respect to the recovery and the restoration and the need for resiliency as we rebuild New York. And I very much look forward to working with Shaun in that effort. We've already had several meetings where we've talked about what we need to do. John Jarvis will be formally serving as my designee on that task force to make sure that the assets that we have here in New York and along the Atlantic coast are fully considered as we move forward. I want to make a comment about an effort that gives me great hope, because it's an effort that we've worked with many of you on, including Mayor Bloomberg and Vince Cipolla and so many others, and that is the creation of a great urban park here in America. The President, some years ago, held a conference both at the White House as well as the Interior, where we brought together the conservation leaders from all around America. And we asked a simple question. 100 years ago, President Roosevelt had the first meeting of conservationists around the country and asked them what should be the conservation agenda at the beginning of the last century. President Obama did that and asked us what should be the conservation agenda for the 21st century for the United States of America. So we forged an initiative under the President's leadership and the involvement of the White House and my colleagues on the Cabinet called the America's Great Outdoors. And the America's Great Outdoors, at its essence, has the principle of connecting people of all walks of life and all ages to the great outdoors of America. And as we have moved forward with implementing that program over the last several years, I'd like to focus on 3 places where I think the America's Great Outdoors embodies this agenda for the 21st century in conservation. The first of those is making sure that we're protecting and preserving the landscapes of national significance. And so for me, that takes us to the work that we've done in places like Florida and the Everglades, the Crown of the Continent in Montana and Wyoming, the Flint Hills in Kansas, and the duck factory, the prairie potholes of South Dakota and North Dakota, but also to many of our marine areas and our estuaries in places like Jamaica Bay right here in New York. So we have major efforts underway to try to make sure that these landscapes that are so special for our nation are landscapes that are in fact protected. A second area for us under the America's Great Outdoors umbrella has been to put a focus on how we deal with the rivers of the United States of America. And so we have now restored and rehabilitated the Penobscot River, which now has opened up to about 1,100 miles of river, which allows the Atlantic salmon to go up all the way 1,100 miles to the headwaters of that river. Across the country, in places like Washington, we have moved forward with the largest river restoration project in the history of the National Park Service, with a restoration of the Elwha River, which now is opened up for about 72 miles to allow the salmon to come from the Pacific up the Elwha River and restore and respect tribal rights that are also important for us in that area of the country. So across this entire nation, from the San Joaquin River in California to the Middle Rio Grande in Texas, to our work on the Colorado River, and in fact to places like Maryland and Washington, D.C. on the Anacostia. And yes, right here in New York with the Harlan and the Bronx River, we have designated those 2 rivers here in New York, the Harlan and the Bronx River, as major rivers that we need to restore and bring back to the resiliency that they used to have at one point in time, and we intend to get that done. Now, as I talk, the landscapes of national significance, there's the rivers of the United States of America, and making sure that we turn our faces to those rivers and embrace them for their economic and their environmental potential. But in addition to that, making sure that where people now live, we are giving them access to the great urban areas and the outdoors. And I can think of no greater example than here in New York. And under the leadership of Mayor Bloomberg, the agreements that we have put together with New York to try to create a seamless set of connections between the national park assets in New York and the assets of New York City. And we're well on our way to getting that done. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about this because I think it's an opportunity that we all have as we continue to think about how we rebuild this area in the post-Hurricane Sandy timeframe. When I first came to New York to work on the Jamaica Bay issues, I came here at the request of Marion High School and other people who had had Jamaica Bay and the Gateway National Recreation Area as a keystone and crown jewel in their minds. And yet they saw much of Jamaica Bay and Floyd Bennett Field as essentially places that were abandoned and that no one was paying much attention to them. And so, in probably 7 or 8 trips that I've taken to New York to work on these issues, it culminated in an agreement between the United States Department of Interior and the City of New York. And that agreement essentially calls for how we can work together and bring these assets that belong to the people of the United States through the ownership of the federal government and belong to the people of the City of New York through the City of New York, and make it one seamless, great urban park for the 18 million people or so who live not only in New York City but in the surrounding areas. This is a vision, a project which will take us a long time to frankly implement, but we're well on our way in moving forward with key aspects of that agreement. One, we're looking at how we connect up some of these areas so that we have not only the land trails but also the water trails to be able to give access to these great places to more people in the City of New York. We also are looking at how we connect up both the city assets, some state assets, and the assets of the National Park Service to make sure that we are reaching out to the young people of the City of New York. You only have to think about what Jamaica Bay can do as an ecological environmental learning center for the young people who are attending the schools of New York. But right here in the middle of the most populous city in the United States of America, the young people who are going to school can go and learn about water, water quality, about the wildlife, about the birds, about what is out in those great outdoors. That is part of our vision for what we can do with New York City and Jamaica Bay. And we have already implemented pieces of that program. And in fact, part of that has been trying to create an urban campground right here in New York. And so in the last several years, we now have established what we consider to be the greatest urban campground in the United States, where we have many people who are now camping out, and campgrounds have been established in Floyd Bennett Field. And we'll continue to build on that to make sure that the people of New York have that kind of access to the great outdoors. And in addition to that, we are looking at another component which I think is particularly relevant at this point in time. At Director Jarvis's request and recommendation, we've included a proposal to come up with an urban ecology center. An urban ecology center that would help us bring together the best of science on how we deal with this interface along these coastal areas, places like New York, and how we make it an environmental education learning center. We've done that in a few other places around the country, including one up in the Washington, D.C. area. And our hope is that we're able to establish that kind of an urban ecological center here in New York and Jamaica Bay as well. So there's a lot of work still that we have to do. But as I work with Secretary Donovan as a formal member of the President's Task Force, I have committed all the capacities of the Department of Interior to make sure that the way that New York is rebuilt will ensure that the 18 million people that live within the entire metropolitan area within New York and outside of New York have these kinds of opportunities to connect up to the outdoors. Now, New York is not the only city that we work on with respect to these kinds of issues. In the city of St. Louis, where I was asked by Senator Claire McCaskill, now some 4 years ago, to go and visit the Arch at St. Louis because it had a leak on the roof of the Arch there at St. Louis. And so I went, and as we were there looking at the Arch at St. Louis, and she was asking how we could find some money to try to fix the leak, we took a walk around, and we recognized that the national park at the Arch was essentially totally separated from a very historic part of our history, the Dred Scott Courthouse, because I-70 went right between them. So we're trying to figure out how we essentially are able to bring them together by covering up I-70 and doing some other things there. Because it's important that we connect it up to the Dred Scott Courthouse and to all the other national park assets there. And then you look to the east of the Arch at St. Louis, and there, the third largest river in the world, the Mississippi River, flows right through the middle of that area, and yet there was no connection between our national park and this greatest river in the mainland of the United States. And so what we've done is we've worked with the local community and now have identified and are investing about $100 million there to try to create an area that will make that a great urban park for the 3.2 million people who live on both sides of the river, in East St. Louis as well as in St. Louis and in the surrounding areas. And we're doing the same thing in Los Angeles, and we're doing the same thing in Denver, Colorado, and the surrounding areas, and in Albuquerque on the Middle Rio Grande and other places around the country. Well, I think that you here in New York and in New Jersey have a great opportunity to show us how we can best do that. And because of the foundation that has been already set under the leadership of Mayor Bloomberg and so many other people who've been involved, I believe that we will be able to do that here in New York City. So let me just conclude my comments here, Vin, by saying this. I am forever grateful of the opportunity that I have had in my life, because I have had the great fortune of being Secretary of Interior, United States Senator, Attorney General. But it started because I had a set of parents who believed that anything was possible. I had a father who was a Army sergeant in World War II, and a mother who at the age of 19 found her way across the nation from the place that had no name in New Mexico to come and work in what eventually became the Pentagon, then opened up as a War Department. And even though as we were growing up, most people who probably would have visited our place would have said, these 8 kids in this family probably aren't going to go very far. We didn't have electricity in our home, and we didn't have a telephone. And yet, my parents taught us that in this country, that if we dreamed big enough, if we believed in ourselves, if we took our education seriously, that anything was possible here in the United States of America. And so as a result of the teachings of my parents, all 8 of their children became first-generation college graduates. It's something that always inspires me and always inspires my family, who now at the age of almost 91 is at the ranch 265 miles south of Denver. And so I think about the daunting task ahead of all of us, because it is a daunting task ahead of all of us, how we make sure that New York and the surrounding areas are built in the right way for the future. And it's going to happen. It's going to happen because we have that faith in that future. You have that faith in that future. And I want to tell you that as Secretary of Interior, that I will commit all of our resources within the Department of Interior to work closely with under President Obama's leadership and with Secretary Donovan to make sure that 10 years from now, when we look back at what has happened here in New York and New Jersey, 5 years from now, a year from now, that we will be able to say that we learned lessons, and because we learned the lessons, we actually have rebuilt New York in a better way than ever before, and that New York will be swimming proudly, and New York will not sink anytime, because this is the heart of the United States of America in so many ways. It is the Big Apple, and we will be back. Thank you very much.
Everyone, thank you so much for your interest in this. As Vin said, we will be back. We think that it's very important to reconvene this discussion probably in about 6 months' time and see where we all are. Thank you for your interest, thank you for your questions, and we enjoyed having you.
I honestly don't know about that.
I mean, it looks like one of ours, but I mean, I think it's ours.
Yeah, good.
I'm Jet, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, yes, under by Jumbo. When we all went to the diner. Yeah, take care of